This is Colin O'Keefe with LXBN TV, and today we are discussing the story of French privacy authorities with the CNIL raising strong concerns regarding Google's new privacy policy, which consolidates user data and uses it across all of their products. Joining me today from Reed Smith's London office is attorney Cynthia O'Donoghue, co-head of the Data Privacy, Security, and Management Group there, and author on the Global Regulatory Enforcement Law blog. Cynthia, first off, can you walk us through the backstory here? For those who don't know, what is the CNIL and what privacy regulations does its president believe Google violated?
The CNIL, the CNIL actually, is the French National Data Protection Regulator. And the law essentially is the EU Data Protection Law, which is a body of law that governs the way personal data is handled throughout the European Union. Each country has had to implement that directive into its national laws. So France has actually, the French regulator, the CNIL, has essentially undertaken the role as asked of it by the supervisory body at the EU level to review whether the new policy complies with the EU Data Protection Directive. Mm-hmm. Now, the directive requires that companies are very transparent about the way they handle people's personal data. Mm-hmm. And so that is the main thing that the CNIL was looking at.
I see. And you know, getting more into the specifics here, you know, what are the CNIL's primary concerns as laid out in their open letter to Google? It's my understanding that the president, you know, sent their CEO a letter, had an open letter even out there. You know, what were their concerns within that?
Yeah, that's right. The CNIL sent a letter to Larry Page, which is the CEO of Google, and the main concern is that the policy as a whole does not meet the EU data protection requirements. Specifically, the privacy policy doesn't lay out the actual purposes for which the data is collected, how it's aggregated, and how it's used. So in the CNIL's view, it doesn't provide that baseline level of transparency that is required. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately, in their view, that if a privacy professional, like the regulatory authority, can't figure it out, how is an individual user going to be able to figure it out?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I think Google, I mean, based on my own personal experience, they've been, you know, somewhat vague. They put those little headers up there that say we have a new privacy policy and we're consolidating all your data for a better user experience. It's very vague. You know, you get the sense that it's trying to say that it's for their products, when really you get the sense that it's more targeted advertising. And I think that's where the problem is that it's so vague and probably intentionally vague. You know, finally,
the other thing is Google said they had consulted quite a bit with the EU regulators, and that hasn't been true across the board. Some were actually given very little notice and only saw the privacy policy, you know, a day or two before the new policy was announced back in January.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just not good. And then finally, how much power or sway does the CNIL have to force Google to comply with the necessary privacy regulations? You know, Google rolled out this privacy policy already on March 1st. Is there any scenario in which they'd be forced to roll it back, or are they more likely to face fines? You know, what's the course of action here?
Well, the CNIL has injunctive powers as well as fining and regulatory powers. The letter essentially was its preliminary impression, so the investigation isn't actually complete. So, of course, whether it uses those powers will depend on the outcome of the investigation. CNIL has already fined Google once before 100,000 euros for violation of the French Data Protection Act. So there is additional history there. The CNIL can do the same again. It can fine up to 300,000 euros, or it can use those injunctive powers and order Google not to apply the policy or to stop the policy, you know, the future application of the policy, and ask them to address certain of the CNIL's concerns. What will be interesting to see, given that the EU regulators across the board asked the CNIL to look into it on their behalf, is whether the action that CNIL takes would extend across the EU, or whether or not it would extend just to the rollout of the policy within the French territory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to watch. You know, I think we've seen it happen with Facebook before and now with Google, where they think they're fine within the United States, but you know, based on what I've seen, the privacy regulations over in Europe and throughout the EU are much, much stronger and much, more defined than we have in the States thus far. So it's going to be interesting to watch. Once again, that was Cynthia O'Donoghue of Reed Smith. For more on the story, be sure to check out her post. It's at globalregulatory-enforcement-lawblog.com. And of course, we have more on the Google privacy policy at lxbn.lexblog.com. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you.